All right, Freedom. It's just so lucky to be with you guys again on a Sunday. It's always so lucky for me to be up here and just see all your faces. And I don't know about you guys, but 2024 has started with an absolute bang. And it sometimes feels that the Christmas and New Year and all of that kind of stuff might have been 6 or 8 months ago. But yeah, here we are. And I wonder if in all of this chaos, we still remember the invitations that Daryl has given us in the first 2 weeks that we've had at Freedom. If you've forgotten, don't worry. You're going to get a reminder in just a second. But the first invitation that we received right at the beginning of the year was to make it New Year's resolution to get to know God better. Following on from that, Daryl shared with us last week about his experience at the Manga. And I think there are two things that struck me really forcefully when Daryl was sharing about the Manga. The first was just his passion for Jesus, you know. Even as he was sharing about this crazy cycle race that I don't really understand, all the way from Bloemfontein down to somewhere in the Cape, he found the time to give glory to Jesus. And he shared about his struggles as he took Jesus with him on that cycle race. And I hope that we can maybe do a little bit of that this year as well and take a lead from Daryl there. The next thing that came through quite clearly is that Daryl likes cycling. Did anybody pick that up at all? Eh? So I guess, sometimes you can just tell by looking at somebody that they're into something. Obvious example is maybe you're walking down the street and you see a guy wearing a T-shirt that has a band's logo on it or something like that. And you can tell, what kind of music it is that they listen to. And if you look at Daryl, often he's got his Sani to See jacket on. You see he's not wearing it today. But if you're chatting to him, it doesn't take long for him to slide in a reference to Specialized or Merida. Now, I don't know what those are. I had to look it up. Apparently, those are bicycles. But, if we're into something, if we're passionate about something, it makes a mark on us. So you can tell just by looking at somebody who they follow, whether it's a sports team or a band or whatever it is that they're into. I wonder sometimes if people can tell just by looking at me that I'm a follower of Jesus. If they can tell just by spending a little bit of time with me that I've taken the invitation to follow Jesus. Now, one of the things that you have to know is that when you start to follow somebody, when you get into something, your behavior starts to change. So these crazy cyclists, they get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and they go on these long rides. I didn't even know that 4 o'clock in the morning was a thing. Apparently, after you go to sleep and before you wake up, there's a time in the morning called 4 o'clock, and some people are awake then. And not only are they awake, but they're exercising. It's insane. But these guys that are into cycling, they follow the Tour de France, and they want to be just like those guys on the bike. Maybe I should use an example from my own life, because I don't really know that much about cycling. But when I said sometime that you could tell what a person was into just by looking at them, when I was a younger dude, I used to wear Doc Martens and had a long hair, and usually had my skateboard tucked under one arm, and had a T-shirt with Kurt Cobain's face on it or something like that. And you could tell just by looking at me that I did not pump up the jam. So if you don't know what that is because you're too young, that's a reference to techno. Ask your parents, they'll explain it to you. But you could tell just by looking at me that the whole grunge scene had taken hold. I was a huge fan of guys like Eddie Vedder and Kurt Cobain and Tony Hawk. And because I was into all of this kind of stuff, my behavior started to change. And the things that I did and the people I hung out with also started to change over time. And so my brothers and I, we convinced my dad to build us a skateboard ramp so that I could practice to be just like Tony Hawk. I have to say that the only thing I really got right in that respect was how to wipe out. But you have to give it the good old school try. Also got myself a guitar, and I learned to play Come As You Are, because, that was the only one that you can really play. You can play it with 2 fingers. And even though I'm not left-handed, I was Kurt Cobain when I could play Come As You Are on my acoustic guitar. I bought just about every Pearl Jam album that I could get my hands on. Even some bootlegs that anecdotally had been snuck out of the studio while they were recording their albums. But I was into this stuff. And so even the places that I went start to change. I used to go to the Doors on a Thursday night because that's where you went if you were into this kind of stuff. Everything started to change. And I became a different person. Now, 2 weeks ago, we were encouraged to get to know Jesus better in 2024. And there's a funny thing that happens when you start to get to know Jesus better. Just as when I was into the grunge scene and my behavior started to change, when we get to know Jesus, we start to change as well.
Very good, mate.
And we start to become more like him.
Brilliant.
Now, this is an invitation that Jesus puts out a number of times in the Bible, to come and follow him. And actually, when you say that you're a Christian, one of the things that you're saying is that you are a follower of Jesus and that you are passionate about the things of Jesus and you're passionate about Jesus. So what does it actually mean to follow Jesus? In simple terms, really, it just means that I'm trying to learn to know him, to learn to know to be like him, and to follow him as closely as I can. Now, when I say that I want to try and be like Jesus, I don't mean that you need to go out and get yourself a first century tunic and quit your job and become a carpenter and move to Nazareth.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
That's not what I mean by being like Jesus. Okay. I would make a terrible carpenter. I'm terrible with my hands. I can remember when I was in school, you had industrial arts.
Yeah.
And every year in industrial arts, I would get 50-something% for industrial arts. Half of it was for technical drawing, and half of your mark was for actually producing what it is that you'd drawn. And every year I would get close to 100% for technical drawing, and I would get an extra 3 or 4%, which would give me 51 or odds percent for making what it was that I had drawn. So when I say that we need to become like Jesus, that's not what I mean. I mean that I'm learning from Jesus to live my life as he would if he was in my situation. So how do I go about doing this? Now, Foxy touched on this a little bit last week when he said that we need to cast off everything to run the race. And you'll remember his example from the Manga, how the night before he started his race with a whole bunch of stuff that he didn't actually really need and was going to weigh him down later, and he regretted doing that. But you really got a sense, as Foxy was sharing, about all the preparation that went in to him doing this race. So what do we then have to do to run the race for Jesus? First of all, we need to cast off everything that we don't need in order to follow him. But I want to offer you guys 2 quite practical and easy suggestions. And they won't be news. They're things that you know, and they're things that you do instinctively. Okay. But I think sometimes if you're anything like me, I suddenly think that, the things that I've learned in everyday life don't apply when I'm talking about Jesus. And there's some secret mystery or something that I've missed that I need to apply in my spiritual life in order to grow. But it's a lot easier, I think, sometimes than we make it. You'll remember my example from my grunge days. When you're passionate about something, we begin to change, and it comes naturally.
Wow.
Okay. And it's the same with Jesus. Now, maybe you're sitting here today and you think to yourself, well, I don't really know how to be a follower of Jesus. And as I was preparing this message, I had to look at myself, and I need you to know that I'm definitely not the finished article. And there are areas in my life where I have to say that I'm not very much like Jesus. And so, when I'm saying that these are practical suggestions that you guys can follow, I'm actually preaching to myself. I need to do these things more so that I can be more like Jesus as well. invitation that my wife reminded me of just before when I was doing my preparations. If you're prepared to accept this invitation and to take these practical suggestions, maybe something that you can do, which is extremely helpful, is just to tell somebody that you trust and that you know and who's on a similar journey that you have accepted this invitation, that you are going on this journey, so that they can hold you accountable for that, so they can check in with you and ask you how it's going. And that is a key, I think, that will really help you just to put these into practice. And so the first practical suggestion that I want to offer you today comes from the Gospel of Matthew. If you've got your Bible with you, you can turn to Matthew with me. And Foxy always says that he loves to hear the sound of the pages turning. But if you don't have your physical Bible with you and you want to get out your smartphone, that's also fine. And we're looking at Matthew 7 and from verse 7. Now, in my Bible, these verses have the heading, Ask, Seek, and Knock. And this is what it says. It says, Ask, and it will be given unto you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened unto you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Okay. And I think the clue here that I've picked up is that the first step to getting to know Jesus is just to ask him to get to know him better. Okay. In practical terms, it would be like if you wanted to spend more time with somebody and be better friends with them, you would ask them to go for a cup of coffee. It's a similar kind of thing. We need to ask Jesus to go for a cup of coffee with us, to come spend time with us, to reveal himself to us. And in that way, we get to know him better. We also have to acknowledge that we need his help to get him to know him better. Yeah. And by asking, we're able to do that. When we're asking Jesus for something and we're talking to him, that's the majority of what we understand to be prayer. It's not super complicated. It doesn't have to use fancy Christianese or anything like that. It's really just talking to Jesus, asking him to help you out with what's on your heart, telling him about your life. Now, we don't just do this once. It's something that we need to do persistently. We need to push into that a little bit, to seek him. And then having done that, you need to expect that Jesus is answered. What it says in the text is that if those of you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Heavenly Father give you good gifts? We can expect Jesus to answer us when we are trying to get to know him better. And we need to look out for his response. Now, the more time you spend with him, the easier it becomes for us to recognize his responses. Going back to my example again, of when I was into the grunge scene, after I'd heard the first couple of tracks off of 10 by Pearl Jam, and I have to say here that I listened to that tape until it was so stretched that I don't think it was even vaguely recognizable. But I would keep listening to it, and eventually I got to the point where it didn't matter if I'd heard a particular song by Pearl Jam before. If something was playing in the background, I would recognize Eddie Vedder's voice. And it works the same with us, with Jesus. When you spend time with him, when you take the time to get to know him, you begin to recognize Jesus' voice. Even if he's saying something that you may not have heard before, you know that it's Jesus' voice. There's elsewhere in the Gospels where it says that, where Jesus says of himself, "I am the good shepherd, and the sheep know my voice." I said that I want to make this practical, and so my suggestion is that it might be best at first when we're trying to get to know Jesus, to set aside some time to talk to him away from the distractions of our busy lives. In the Bible, we read that the prophet Elijah heard the voice of God in a gentle whisper. Gentle whispers are very difficult to hear when you're traveling down the highway at 120 kilometers an hour with Hot 1027 blaring in the background, and while I'm sending a text to my boss to tell him that I'm going to be 20 minutes late for whatever meeting it is. It's also hard to hear the whisper when you're trying to get ChatGPT to do your assignment, and while you're checking Instagram and binge watching some series in the background. Okay. You can pray in those situations. You can, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't pray continuously. Okay, we should pray all the time. But when we're praying in those situations, it's always going to be a bit of a one-way traffic. Okay. I think of it like talking to my kids. Like if I'm going down the highway, yes, I can pray to God and I can talk to him. But when I'm trying to talk to my kids, when they're in the back of the car while I'm taking them between extramurals and stuff like that, often the conversation goes along the lines of, like, how was your day? And then they answer, and I'm like, I'm sorry, what was that? And it's the same with Jesus. We can pray continuously, but if we really want to get the benefit, if we really want to get to know him better, what we need to do is we need to set aside some quality time to enable us to do that. I can't think of better advice on how you would pray than from Jesus himself. And so, again, in Matthew 6, read the following words. From verse 6, now once again, this paragraph or this section in my Bible has the heading prayer. This is what Jesus says. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. And then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like the pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. This then is how you should pray. And then he goes on to share the most famous prayer from the Bible, I think, which is the Lord's Prayer. Now, I think the model here is really helpful, right? Jesus goes into a room by himself, and he closes the door so that there's no distractions from the outside world. And he talks to God. I like the part where he says, don't babble. I think sometimes I think, when I'm talking to God, I need some sort of special code language to speak to him. And it must contain lots of words that I don't use in my ordinary English, There's lots of having and holding and receiving and giving, and it starts to sound a little bit weird, We don't need any of that. We don't need to trip over the words. All we need to do is to talk to him. Sometimes what I like to do is just imagine that Jesus is there in the room with me. If it's helpful, I know a friend of mine actually has an empty chair which he puts in the room to help him to imagine that Jesus is there, and he makes himself a cup of coffee, and he imagines that he's having coffee with Jesus. That's a great place to start. Just talk. Just talk. Jesus knows what's on your heart. The prayer changes us. It doesn't change Jesus. And so the prayer is for us. The next practical hint that I want to give you, we find in the text, which is in John 8. That's just a little bit later on in your Bible in the New Testament. And I'm looking at verse 31 and 32. And this is what it says. To the Jews who had believed in him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. In another translation, which is the King James Version, the text reads like this. If you abide in my word, then you are my disciples. Now, what does it mean to abide in his word? Foxy and I went to Benoni High School, and so maybe the word abide is a bit technical. But all that really means is to study the Gospels, and more importantly, to put what you find there into practice. That's how we abide in His Word. Now, I think that it's important to mention that it's unrealistic and unhelpful to think that we're going to be perfect at this right off the bat. Okay. You may have this expectation that you gave your life to Jesus last week and you'll never shout at the taxi driver again when he cuts you off at the robots. Okay. So don't be surprised if that situation occurs and you react badly. But that doesn't mean you're not a Christian anymore. It doesn't mean you're not saved anymore. Can I encourage you in that situation just to keep going? It's a process. It takes time. What about that sandpaper person at school that rubs you up the wrong way? You started following Jesus. They haven't changed. So Monday morning, they're still going to rub you up the wrong way. Maybe you'll react in peace and love, in which will make you a better person than me sometimes. But maybe you'll react badly. Just don't give up. Okay. How many things have you ever tried in your life that the first time you tried it, you were like superb at it right off the bat? If you're anything like me, probably not a hell of a lot. You need to practice, you need to work, you need to train, and you get better gradually as you go along. And our Christian walk is the same. But what we can count on is that Jesus comes to meet us in our efforts. He's not surprised when we mess up. Why should we be? And He's prepared to keep going with us even after we mess up. We should as well. Now, you may be asking yourself as I say this, why is it that I really would want to get to know Jesus better? What's so special about Jesus? A professor at a university who was a Christian was once asked the same question when he was offering Jesus as an example that people could follow. And his response to that question was simply this: who else could you possibly suggest? I think sometimes I make the mistake of thinking Jesus is nice. He seems like an honest fellow, and I should probably, kind of listen politely to what he has to say. Don't make that mistake. Jesus is brilliant. He's a genius. If He was into computers, we would have had quantum computers in the 1st century BC. But the thing that He speaks about most is the kingdom of heaven. And when a genius, somebody of Jesus' caliber, speaks about something more than anything else in the Gospels, it's not because of any other reason than that is what is most important. But I think because Jesus is not a scientist, He doesn't wear lab coats, we don't know if He had spectacles or anything like that, we don't think that He's clever. Jesus is a genius. Every word that Jesus says has the power to set your life on fire. He's the Son of God Himself. And if we could only understand the absolute genius of what He has told us, we would throw all our other books of learning away and focus just on what He said to make sure that we understood it. I'm not actually saying you need to go home and burn your other books, but I think you take my point. Now, maybe the thought of reading the entire Bible is a bit intimidating. I know that when I look at this and I think about reading it from cover to cover, I think to myself, phew, that's going to be like quite a long trek. But maybe you just want to start with the first four books of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's a pretty good place to start. The large majority of the actual words that Jesus spoke, recorded by His disciples who were eyewitnesses to His life, are recorded in those 4 books. So you could start there. Maybe that's still too much. Just choose one of them. Pro tip, Mark is the shortest. And you can get through it. If you sit down and carve out about half an hour, you can get through the majority of Mark if you read. Okay. Maybe that's still too much. Okay. Maybe you just want to keep it to the 3 chapters of the Sermon on the Mount, which you can find in Matthew 5 to 7. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus gives an absolute masterclass to crowds of people from different diverse backgrounds using very clear examples to teach them about the kingdom of God. It's a really great place to start. You could spend a lifetime just on those 3 chapters of the Sermon on the Mount, and you would learn something new every time you opened them. What I've found helpful in the past as well, if you really are lost, is just get one of these. They're a reading plan. Okay, there are hundreds of them. If you go to any of the Christian bookshops or anything like that, they say that there are 365 devotions. Now, don't be intimidated. The publishers don't actually know that you skip a day. All right. So it's got one for every single day of the year, but you don't have to do it every single day of the year. Okay? Start with a couple of times a week or whatever the case may be. But it's usually 1 or 2 pages just with a single verse and an idea for prayer or something like that. But all I'm saying is just make a start, man. Get into it. Start actually following Jesus. I know that when I do this kind of stuff, and again, I'm talking to myself, my discipline fluctuates, and sometimes I'm good at it, and sometimes I'm bad at it. But I know that when I do, at some point, I encounter Jesus again. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that Jesus left and, forgot about me while I was doing other stuff. Okay. But when I focus on him and I concentrate on him again, I encounter him anew. Okay. I learn new stuff about him. I learn more stuff about him. Our relationship gets deeper. Okay. And so it's like I'm getting to know him all over again. And there's so much to know about Jesus. Just make a start. I have to give you a warning. And the warning is that when we decide to get serious about following Jesus, when we ask him to reveal himself, and when we study his teachings and actually do what he said that we should do, there's a cost. There's no getting around it. The cost of following Jesus is everything. Following Jesus will cost you everything. Not all at once, but gradually. Thank you for not walking out. Following Jesus will chip away at your finances as you learn to trust God. And you'll trust God with your material needs and become more aware of the needs of others. Following Jesus will chip away at your ego as the people that you knew before you began following him will begin to notice that you make different decisions, which they may not understand and which they may think are ridiculous. Following Jesus, truly following Jesus, will chip away at your time as you find yourself spending more and more with him, getting to know him better and better. Eventually, though, following Jesus will cost you your pain as he begins to bring healing into your life. Following Jesus will cost you your anger and your resentment as his forgiveness begins to make its way into your hearts. Following Jesus will cost you your shame as you begin to understand that he accepts you and loves you so deeply that he would give up his life for you so that even in death we would never be separated from him. Ultimately, following Jesus will cost you your life, your entire life. But when we give our lives to Jesus, he gives them back to us brand new, restored, and whole, better than they were before we gave them to him. Now you know the cost. You cannot say that you were not warned. Okay. Even in spite of that, will you come with me on this journey? Will you ask Jesus to reveal himself to you so that you can get to know him better? Will you abide in his word and do what he said that we should do? When we begin to do this, that's how we run the race. And we run it to its completion. Amen.